I'm now ready to begin Module 2, Project Identification and Design. This module covers the first phase of the PMD Pro1 phase model. While it would be easy to spend a lot of time on the topics in this module, we only have about 1/2 day allocated during this PMD Pro1 course. So I'll be sure to keep an eye on the clock so that the session doesn't go too long. Note that some of the topics will only be covered at a high level that's appropriate for PMD Pro. So please remember to ask questions of clarification if some of the content and the concepts are explained too quickly. Take a look at this quote from Martin Luther King Jr., the American civil rights activist. It's very appropriate and related to the first topic that I will talk about very soon, doing the right project. I also want to remind you that even though we have organized the training to follow the PMD Pro1 phase model, we also want to emphasize the 5 principles and the 6 disciplines of PMD Pro, since they're integrated throughout all 6 phases. And this should be clear when you read the PMD Pro guide. Remember, the principles are that project management is balanced, comprehensive, integrated, participatory, and iterative. The project management disciplines are scope management, time management, project resource management, risk management, project justification management, and stakeholder management. And as always, and I do this whenever I teach the PMD Pro1 course, I want to remind you that adaptation of the PMD Pro knowledge and tools to particular context, and as much as possible, tailoring to the context for each of you is extremely important. And I'll do the best that I can to adapt and tailor any examples to your situation. Project identification and design represents the first phase in the PMD Pro phase model. Remember that even though the 6 phases are represented in a linear manner on this phase diagram, there will be considerable overlap between the phases. So while project identification and design is a distinct phase, there will be overlap, especially with some of the activities that we'll talk about during project planning, and then they'll be in other phases as well. We need to be sure before we set up, perform the detailed planning, and start implementation that the right project has been identified and that the outputs and the goals that will contribute to higher level change are consistent with the results and impacts that are desired. I also want to remind participants about the triangles that you see around the diagram. They are decision gates, even though there may be additional ones that arise for an individual project. Notice the triangle that sits directly between the project identification and design phase and the project setup phase. This represents the first major decision gate in PMD Pro. Decision gates are critical for making sure we are doing the right projects. And decision gates are key moments for checking in to see if the project is still valid. All projects begin as ideas, a need or an opportunity that is assessed, analyzed, and ultimately developed into a project which is managed through the project lifecycle or phase model. It's during this process that we begin answering the critical question, are we doing the right project? Get it wrong here and the project will be wrong for a long, long time, even if all of the work of the project is planned and implemented well. Get it right and you may be halfway there. In many other sectors that rely on a culture and a history of project management, mostly in the private sector or business, the project begins with the official approval of the project. This is not the case in the international development sector, where the project life more commonly begins with a project identification and design phase. During the project identification and design phase, time, resources, and effort are invested to define the needs, explore opportunities, and analyze the project environment while cultivating relationships, building trust, developing partnership, and designing alternatives for project design. The decisions made during the project identification and design phase connect to existing strategies and determine the overall framework within which the project will subsequently evolve. Establishing the framework early in the project helps ensure that the project is done right. We continuously need to ensure that the reason for doing the project remains valid. This is the discipline of project justification management. Take a close look, a careful look, at the graphic on the screen now. Can you pick up on the story that the graphic is trying to tell? Take a minute to look at this slide before I give you some of my ideas. I'll talk first about the solid line. The solid line is indicating that as a project is progressing through each subsequent stage, as represented here on the horizontal axis, the cost and the staffing levels, as represented on the vertical axis, gradually increase until peaking during the implementation phase. Then there is a sharp decrease in project expenses as the project heads toward transition. There shouldn't be anything surprising about that. The dotted line represents the opportunity to cost-effectively manage change. As the project moves forward through the phases, the opportunity gradually decreases. Once project implementation begins, as staff are hired, activities begin, and budgets are allocated and deliverables start to become tangible, the cost of changing becomes higher. The opportunity to cost effectively manage change decreases. Therefore, it is extremely important that the project manager gather and process data to inform good decisions during the project and identification phase. There should be a lot of creative exploration, brainstorming, visioning, and discussion about the best way to move forward. This is a good time to answer some fundamental questions about the project, such as, where will the project work? Who are the beneficiaries? What are the deliverables? what are the major risks, and what is the underlying project logic. Now we'll start to examine the actual work that needs to be done in the project identification and design phase. The project manager, along with the team members and stakeholders, including the beneficiaries, implementing partners, and community groups, must identify project ideas and decide what this project needs to accomplish. So there are three categories of work in this phase to bring that about. There's data collection, data analysis using the concepts of current state and future state analysis, and identification of project logic. The first step in determining whether you are doing the right project is to collect data. In the development sector, we're almost always going to start with the identification of needs. And before beginning, it is important to recognize the difference between a problem-based and an asset-based starting point. Now, both approaches are intended to reach the same destination, which is selecting the right projects and interventions. In an asset-based approach, the focus is on opportunities instead of challenges. The opening question, for example, is to discover what the strengths might be, and to ask this question that you see on the screen: what are you doing that is working well? Another question might be: what good things are you doing that could be shared with others? So it's a focus on the positive. The problem-based approach, on the other hand, seeks to define the problem and fix what's broken. It's a focus on the negative. Those who prefer an asset-based approach may use a set of tools based on appreciative inquiry. Those using problem-based approaches will likely use a problem tree as a primary tool, and that's the route that I'll take today. There's no right or wrong between these two approaches. Both have merit.